Everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be going over a new deck that I just started thinking about and just kind of brewing with, and I've been really enjoying it so far in practice, and that's going to be Golgari Shadow. So green-black, Death Shadow, sort of mid-range utility deck. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. I'm not streaming Magic yet. I have been practicing Magic online a little bit more. I just want to get more proficient with the client and just be able to put on a decent show for you. So I am actively practicing it, and hopefully I should be able to stream it within a week or two. So stay tuned for that. I'll make a channel announcement when that happens. It'll probably be around 9 or 10 o'clock. I don't know if we'll be able to stream a whole league every day. We might try. We might just do a few games. We'll see how it goes, but I will be doing some live content soon as I become just a little bit more comfortable on the client and really kind of refine the deck that I want to play. I've been trying out a whole bunch of different decks. But anyways, be sure to check that out on Twitch as soon as that becomes available. And until then, check me out on YouTube. I did do a couple of videos already about different Yawgmoth versions, and that's what I had been practicing. And kind of the backstory here is I was playing through a Yawgmoth league, and I ended up playing against green-black, and he was running a very different version of the deck from this. He was using Unearths quite a bit, but some of the things were still in there. I think he had some Grists, and I think he had Endurance, and those are very good. And then I just got to thinking, I was like, I would like to try that out because, most of what I like with the Yawgmoth deck so far, and I've played a pretty good chunk of Yawgmoth in practice, and I like a lot about the deck, but one of the major critiques that I have of it is if you don't get Yawgmoth, the rest of it feels kind of underwhelming if they deal with it. Right, if they surgical extraction your Yawgmoth, or they necromentia your Yawgmoth, or they just do something to mess with it, they counterspell it, or they kill it, it's a problem. Now, if he touches the battlefield, you can still get a lot of value out of him, but, and this is a huge thing with him, you already have to have a board established to get a lot of value out of him, and most of the decks that are running around right now are not going to let you establish that board. There's so many 1-mana removal spells, especially like Prismatic Ending, which, exiles cards, so it gets around your Undying creatures quite a bit. It's just really hard to keep creatures on the board in the attrition matchup to get a lot of the value out of Yawgmoth. And out of the, just the online matches I played, probably, 15 to 20, I guess, games so far over the matches, I think I comboed people out like 2 or 3 times in my Yawgmoth, with the Yawgmoth deck. Most of the time, it's just, throwing together some stuff and just trying to beat them down and kill them, with some Geists and Wolves and Grist tokens and stuff like that, right? So usually it's just much more of a utility, grindy type of game plan than it is actually a combo. Just because I just can't keep the creatures on the board most of the time with that deck. And that's another thing, is there's almost no interaction. So it's like you don't have a lot of removal spells, and you don't have any discard. And so it's hard to protect the Yawgmoth when you're actually about to play him. So anyways, the thing that I found most successful with the deck, though, that I really enjoyed a lot was Grist and Endurance. Both of those cards just feel incredibly powerful right now. Grist is just such a great value engine. He puts cards in your graveyard, he gives you tokens, he can kill planeswalkers or creatures. You can search for him, because he counts as a creature card. So there's just a lot of stuff to really love about Grist, and obviously in the Yawgmoth deck, he's really going to shine because of those Undying creatures. But I still think that in just a traditional, mid-range type of deck, he can still bring a lot of value, and he can still be really strong. And then, man, Endurance is just so powerful. My current version of Yawgmoth, I was running 3 in the main and 1 in the board, and I might just move the 4th over to the main. You're just almost never going to go wrong with this card. We'll talk about it more specifically in this deck in a little bit, but the card is just so strong. It's like almost every deck is going to be using the graveyard, at least somewhat, or at least a lot of mainstream decks are. So he just hard hoses, obviously, anything like Reanimator or Dredge or any other dedicated graveyard deck. But even the Delirium decks, have a really hard time dealing with endurance, because it's going to make Unholy Heat a lot weaker. It's going to make Tarmogoyfs weaker. It's going to make Dragon's Rage Channeler a lot weaker. And it's just a 3/4 body for 3 that you can cast with Flash, that also has reach, and it's just, a good all-around creature. There's almost nothing wrong with that card. So it's just really, really strong. So I've been very impressed. So then I just got to thinking, I was like, what if I just tried to go green-black and just play the value part that out of Yawgmoth that seems strong, but just surround it with more independently stable and strong cards, and just said, you know what, forget the combo. We're not comboing most of the time anyways in these decks. Let's just hard commit to the pieces that give us more value, that give us a little more resilience. And so that's how I ended up coming up with this deck and where we are so far. So why would you play Golgari Shadow? You get lots of value. You have ramp in there, which is really good for a lot of the different things that we'll talk about. And then you have really, really good disruption. And the main piece being endurance. The fact that you can main deck 4 endurances in the deck is just going to give you a massive edge, like I said, against a lot of stuff. Murktide, Jund, Red-Black Shadow, Mill, Dredge. Just so many decks in the top. It's going to give you a really big edge against those decks. So I think that's a major reason to try this, at least over Grixis Shadow, which is super popular right now. And I think it even has better card access and card advantage than Grixis Shadow as well. So I think it's going to be superior to Grixis Shadow in general. But we'll see. I'll have to test out a lot more. It's early days, but I've been very impressed with it. So let's go through a few of the cards here. So, Grist in general that I mentioned before is just really good. The notable things why you would play him over something like a Liliana or something like that in this deck. First of all, he creates those tokens, which are very nice. You can sacrifice those tokens to, kill specific creatures or specific planeswalkers that might be bothering you. He mills cards, so he puts cards in the yard. That does give you a bit of filtering, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that's going to allow you to filter for your Auger of Autumn and your Dark Confidant. So if you don't like the top card of your deck, if you see it with Auger, then you can just mill it with Grist, and then you get another look to be able to, cast a creature or play a land off the top, whatever the case may be. So that extra little bit of filtering is very nice. He also does give you a good bit of reach, because this deck is going to be running 28 creatures, at least the current iteration of it. You can almost always ultimate Grist for a good 4 or 5 extra damage just to finish people off, which is really handy. And the fact that he counts as a creature himself as he comes in is really big. You're going to be able to play him with Auger, because Auger only allows you to play lands or creatures, but the fact that he counts as a creature allows you to play him, which is really good. And he's going to get around things like Force of Negation or Spell Pierce or these other things that only apply to non-land creatures. Esper Sentinel, that Hammer Time plays, you can still play this and you don't have to pay the tax. They don't draw a card because it's a creature. So there's just a lot of corner cases where the fact that he's a creature becomes relevant in a lot of situations. So just really good all-around card. Has that reach, tokens, removal, filtering for Auger and Confidant. Really nice 3-drop that pairs very well to establish a board presence on turn 2 if you get an Ignoble or Birds or whatever. He just fits really, really well with the deck overall. So maybe not quite to the same magnitude of power as it is with the traditional Yawgmoth deck, but it's pretty dang close. It's still really, really good here. And then the next one. Now, this is a card that I have not seen get a lot of press, Auger of Autumn. I saw there were a couple of Yawgmoth decks that ran like one of them that did okay in a tournament. That's where I'd actually just been looking, just searching Scryfall, just every green and black creature when I was trying to figure out a way to make my Yawgmoth deck a little bit more consistent, add a little bit more spice to it. And then I came up with this, and I saw that one person was running this, and I tried it, and this card is really, really good, especially in this type of value shell, and I just think a lot of people are not playing it as much as they should. So for 3 mana, you can play it. You look at the top card of your library anytime that you want. Now, it's just you that sees the top card of your library. You can play lands from the top of your library. So already, it's kind of like a Courser of Crufix, type effect, and there was another card before that. It's a 2/3 body. You don't gain a life off of, playing the land like you would with Courser of Crufix. However, This is the big one down here, Coven. As long as you control 3 or more creatures with different power numbers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. Not one per turn. As many as you want off the top of your library with this. So if you have a lot of cheap creatures, or you have a lot of mana on the board, this is incredible, because you can play a land or you can play a creature. So, it's not uncommon with her to be able to get, 2 or 3 extra cards on some turns, especially with the filtering, in this deck, right? If you have a fetch land, or reset the top of your library, if you have Grist to mill an extra card, you got a 3 casting cost on top of your library, you've only got 2 mana available, no problem. Go ahead and mill it. Maybe you'll find a 1-drop or a 2-drop that you can cast. Right? So there's just so many different ways you can filter. You've got Dark Confidant as well. It allows you to see what your next card is going to be. So you can, and especially if you want to play Dark Confidant with Death's Shadow, that can be a dangerous proposition, right? If you get really low, if you're like 3 life or something, and Dark Confidant's on the board and you have a Death's Shadow, obviously that can be scary, but you'll know what your card is with Auger, right? You can leave that land on top if you want to ensure you're not going to have to pay any life off of Death's Shadow. So it just brings so much value, so much utility, works really well with a lot of other cards in the deck. It gives you immediate value, so as soon as you cast it, you get to have that look, and if it's a land, you get to play the land. So even if they kill it, you still get 1 card off of it. You're going to 2-for-1 them. And they have to kill it immediately most of the time. If they do not kill this, you will just run away with the game with the card advantage. Because like I said, it's almost always an easy 2 cards per turn. So it's like a, Dark Confidant, on crack. It's just really, really, really good card. Now, if you have multiples down, you don't gain any extra benefit off of that. So I'm not sure if 4 is the total number there, but I do know that if they don't kill it, they're going to have a really hard time winning the game. So they're going to kill it a lot of the times. That's why I would run 4 just for the redundancy, just because you don't really mind. If you draw an extra one and one's already on the board, who cares? Like, you're probably already winning anyways. So I've just been supremely impressed with this card. It's very, very good for any deck that's going to be running a lot of creatures. She's, particularly strong. And then you've got Birds of Paradise. Not much to say there. Just a good filter creature. I'm not sure if you want to run 8 ramp cards, but we have a lot of powerful 3-drops, right? We have Auger, we have Grist, we have Endurance. Now, yes, you may not want to cast Auger or Endurance, on turn 3. But I still think it's nice to have them around. You do get a little bit of extra value later on. You can sacrifice them to Grist. Having a bunch of mana on the board is good with Auger. That's going to let you cast more spells off the top of your library. And it's going to be less likely you're going to have dead cards anyways late game, because you're going to have so much drawing. If you draw a Noble Hierarch on turn 5, it may not be the end of the world, right? Because you've got Auger, you have Dark Confidant, you have all these other ways to get additional cards. So that's one of the big problems with Ramp traditionally, is that it's really good in the first couple of turns, but then it's a completely dead draw later on. But you have so much card advantage with this deck, it's okay. And you still get the value, like I said later, off of Auger, off of Grist. It's still going to be pretty good. So that's why I'm running the 4... or the 8 total ramp cards, the Ignoble and the Birds of Paradise. Just the obvious picks. Obviously Ignoble, because it's going to have Exalted, and then Birds, just because it gives you black and green. It's easy. Yeah, it can't really block anything. It's got 0 power, but that 0 power is actually really useful for Auger of Autumn as well, because all you have to have is Auger. She's got 2 power, a 0 power card, like a Birds or something like that, and then just anything else, a Grist token, or Endurance, or Bob. I guess Bob would have, or Dark Confidant rather, would have the 2 power. But anyways, that 0 power does help you out, does help you activate Coven with Auger. So just all around, 8 ramp, I think it's pretty good. They're going to kill a lot of that stuff anyways. And if they're bolting your Birds, they're bolting your Ignoble Hierarchs and stuff like that, then it's mana neutral, it's 1-for-1, and at least they're not using their bolt or their heat or whatever on your Augers or your Dark Confidants or other things. So anyways, I really like the ramp. That helps you get on the board, helps you get going. It's a little bit different than having Ragavan or Channeler on the board. It's not going to be as much of an immediate threat, but it does ramp you again to those 3 power threats that really can turn the corner. Okay, and then Dark Confidant. So This card I think is really underrated, and it's been kind of like, obviously it was really really good back in the day, but a lot of people just haven't been running it lately, just because there is so much removal out there, and the meta is so fast, and a lot of people are just opting for the Ragavan Dragon's Rage Channeler package, and then just a whole bunch of disruption and removal cards. But if he stays on the board, he gives you a lot of value, right? Every turn an extra card, so it is a little bit slower, it is a little bit grindier, but particularly in some of those, slower matchups, some of those control matchups, things like that, he is good. And he does pair really well with Death's Shadow in the deck because, obviously when you're paying that life, that can be a problem, but if it's getting you lower, if it's making your Death Shadow stronger, then that could ultimately be a good thing. Now, you do run the risk of Shadow when you bring yourself down so much off your fetch lands, your Thoughtseize and stuff like that. An inherent risk might be you just kill yourself with Dark Confidant, but again, you have ways to filter that with this deck. You can use Grist and just sacrifice your own Dark Confidant if you have to, kind of a worst case scenario, or you can just make sure with Auger that you're going to be drawing lands with Dark Confidant, or really cheap spells like one cast spells and things like that. So I think he's good. Once again, he's a must-answer threat in a lot of matchups. If people do not deal with him early on, he will run away with the game. So I think he's just a really solid 2-drop to put in here. I'm not sure if 4 is the number. You could put in something else like a Scavenging Ooze. You could put in stuff like Tarmogoyf. That's one of the notable absences that I don't have in this deck that a lot of the green-black decks run. But because I'm running the 4 Endurances in the main deck, I'm going to be shuffling away the opponent's graveyard most of the time anyways. I might have it in my graveyard. Like, Grist is really nice with that because he's a planeswalker and a creature. I guess he just counts as a creature when he's in the graveyard. But I don't know. He's just kind of a big dumb creature. Like, it's good. He just doesn't give you a lot of immediate value. And I'm not running stuff like, Mishra's Baubles for the artifact ticks, or Urza's Saga for enchantment lands and things like that. So I just feel like with the package that I have going on here, that Tarmogoyf is not going to be as effective, and he just gets blown up so much by other things and doesn't add a lot of value. I mean, Dark Confidant can get blown up before he adds value as well, but I just think he has a lot more synergy with the different kind of cards that I'm running right now. So I don't know. I was pretty impressed when I was playing against green-black. I just, had to leave the Dark Confidant on the board for a couple of turns before I was able to kill it, and man, they just get so much advantage off of that. Especially in a deck like this, where, again, losing the life could actually be a good thing for you with Death's Shadow, and you don't have a lot of high casting cost stuff. I think the highest cost card in here is 3, so you're not going to be taking a lot of damage most of the time off of that Dark Confidant if you don't want to, which is good. And then finally, Death's Shadow. I mean, obviously, people know how strong this card is. You see it in the Grixis version a lot of the time. Just 1 mana. If you can just get down to, 8 or 9 life, then it's an extremely powerful threat. It can get out of heat range in a lot of situations. And people tend to like to play it with Grixis just because everyone loves red, because then you can put it with like Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ragavan, Unholy Heat, Lightning Bolts, all of that good stuff. And people tend to like blue because you have the cute dress down interaction where it pretty much makes it the full 13-13. Then you have Expressive Iteration, which is a very good card. You get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, and typically you can play a land, and then you get 1 more in your hand, and then you have to exile 1. So it's, kind of like a 1 for 2 in a lot of situations with Expressive Iteration. So that is good. Although, like I said, with this deck, I believe a lot of the time you're going to get even more value than you would out of Expressive, right? Like that Auger is probably going to give you 1, or there's a decent chance it's going to give you 1 as soon as she hits the board. Especially if you play her going into turn 4, or if you have ramp on turn 3, where you haven't played the land yet, but you have a land in your hand. You can play her, look at your top card. If it's a land, you can play it. If it's not a land, you can play a land from your hand, still hold priority, and then if you have a 1 cast on top of your library, you can cast the 1 casting cost creature as well. So, she's going to give you value as well. She's going to give you a 2 for 1 if they kill it. So I just think that a lot of stuff in this deck fits into the Death Shadow shell. Like, you still have a lot of disruption, right? You still got your Thought Seizes, your Inquisitions, your Fatal Push, which, you know, is very similar in the early game at least to Unholy Heat. You have all this stuff to keep the board clear, to sort of wipe up some of those threats, and you can clean them out with Death Shadow. The only difference in this deck is that you have a lot of ways to go find it, which is pretty massive, because you can go dig for it with Auger. You know, you get more looks at Auger if you have Grist in hand. You have Dark Confidant to draw extra cards. So I just think you're drawing a lot more cards with this deck, and it's going to be a lot more likely you're going to find it than you would. I mean, Expressive Iteration does let you, you know, dig 3 and go find it. But I don't know. We'll see. But I think it works really well because, again, you've got all your Thought Seizes, you got your fetch lands, but then you also have your Dark Confidant where you're getting value off of it, off of losing some of your life. And so I think he just fits in perfectly with this shell. It's just kind of an over-the-top threat just to help you get through. And then, so you've got Death Shadows there, and then Endurance. As I mentioned before, this is Big Daddy. Like, I really underestimated this card until I played it and played against it a lot. This just completely dominates so many matchups, and it's so unassuming, right? You just shuffle all of the cards from someone's graveyard on the bottom of their library, but it does so much, right? Mill has an extremely hard time beating this. You know, any graveyard deck, like I mentioned before, whether it's Reanimator, whether it's Living End, whether it's Dredge, they're going to have a hard time with this. And then all the Delirium decks are going to have a hard time with this because you're going to be shutting off the Unholy Heats. You're going to be shrinking those Tarmogoyfs. You're going to be, you know, shrinking those Dragon's Rage Channelers. You're going to be, you know, getting rid of all of those cards so Lurrus can't get anything back. It's going to be useful. So it even has some fringe use against, like, Hammer Time. It's not great there, but if you manage to kill their Hammer, you know, like, post-board, and they try to get it back with Lurrus, you can just Endurance. And a cute interaction with Endurance with this card is if it's on the top of your library, you can actually pitch the green card and play it off the top of your library as well. Because Augur says you may cast the card, not play the card. You may cast creature cards from the top of your library. And because it's a cast creature spells from the top of your library, not play. So because it's cast, I believe you should be able to use the alternative cast costs. So you can actually, you know, sneak and get people that way if you want to. Or once again, just filter through your library. I've done that before where you're drawing so many cards, you just cast it just to get it off the top of your library so maybe you can go get something else. So that's another interaction that's really good with this deck, is that it plays extremely well with Augur. And even against, you know, like other, like Yawgmoth decks and things like that, right? If their Undying Creature goes to the graveyard, you can Endurance, shuffle it away. It just comes up all the time. And, like, the worst case scenario, right, against, like, you know, white-blue or something that does not use their graveyard whatsoever, it's still 3 for a 3/2, or 3 for a 3/4 with Flash. Right, so it's going to be able to hit those Planeswalkers before they can interact with it. It's going to get around Prismatic Ending for a turn. It's just a really, really good card. Like, the worst case scenario is a 3/4 Flash that has reach for 3. Right, like, you would have killed for that back in the day. Back in my day, we played where creatures were horrible. You know, in the 90s and early 2000s, we would have killed somebody for a creature like this. So, anyways, extremely powerful card. Definitely warrants the $60 price tag, unfortunately, on Magic Online. And that's, by the way, this deck is quite cheap. Other than the Endurances, everything else in this deck is cheap because there are no Ragavans, there are no Urzas. So if you're looking for a budget deck, this is pretty good. And you might be able to substitute something else for the Endurance. Although, again, I would just go ahead and pick up the Endurances if you want to, because I think it's going to be very good for a long time. And I think there's an extremely low probability it ever gets banned. I don't think it's going to get banned. And I think people are continually realizing just how strong this card is. And I think it's going to be a staple in Modern for an extremely long time. Okay, then Hierarchs, we talked about those. Then you just have your standard. You want to go Thought Seizes over Inquisitions just because, you know, paying the extra life is good for Shadow. Thought Seize is just a better card in general if the life doesn't matter as much to you because it gets any card. So it can get the Murktides, it can get the Titans, all that kind of stuff. The Omnaths. So yeah, obviously super strong card. Thought Seizes are somewhat, so they're like $10 each. But most of the cards in this deck are going to be pretty cheap. And Inquisitions for a little bit extra. You could go for 4 Blood Chiefs if you don't want to go for the extra Inquisitions. If you do want to play to the board a little bit more, your turn 1 creatures aren't great for dealing with like Ragavan. DRC's whatever. She's not going to threaten you early, but Ragavan's obviously you don't want to take hits there if you can help it. And the birds and the noble hierarchs don't block as well as like your young wolves and things like that. So it might be correct to run 4 Blood Chiefs over the 2 Inquisitions, but the Inquisitions are still going to be, pretty good cards overall. And then this is something you don't see a lot, and it's mostly just because Unholy Heat is probably better, especially if you get Delirium in a lot of situations. But this is basically very, very similar to Fatal Push. It is sorcery speed, so there are definitely some interactions where it's not going to work. But a lot of times, especially in the early turn, you're just going to kill whatever they're playing. That's 1 or 2 casting costs. Just keep the board clear. And War Chiefs is good for that. You can kick it later, and it can kill a bigger creature. So that is pretty nice that it can actually kill stuff like a Murktide or, it can kill a 4-mana Planeswalker, a Jace, or something like that. Like, there are some situations where it could potentially be more useful than a Fatal Push, especially when it comes to Planeswalkers. It does actually kill Wrenn and 6. That's probably the most relevant thing that Fatal Push doesn't do that this does do in the early game. And Wrenn and 6 is a problem, obviously, for this deck, right? You're running Hierarchs, Birds, Dark Confidants, stuff like that. So Wrenn and 6 is a big deal. So it's okay. Obviously not as good as Fatal Push in a lot of situations, but it's close enough, especially in the early game. And it's just the best that you're going to have, I think, with green-black. You could run something like... blanking out on the name, the green and black, destroy target permanent with casting cost 3 or less that's non-land that can't be countered. Abrupt Decay. There we go. So you could run Abrupt Decays, but I just think having the 1 mana interactions are really important. Obviously that plays well with Dark Confidant, but just so that you can cast multiple spells per turn, because you want to get those cards out of your hand because you're going to be able to refill it so quickly with Augur and Confidence and things like that. Just having those 1 casting costs are nice. So, I don't know. You might want to put in 4 Blood Chiefs instead of 4 Inquisitions. That's obviously going to be weaker against control, but it would help you out against the monkey decks. Fatal Push, standard. You're just going to run 4 of those. And then as far as lands go, nothing too fancy going on here. I did choose the Windswept Heats. It could be any other fetch land, that can get you a green or potentially a black. I just chose Windswept because I already had 2 Windswept. But anything can work there. I would say I am trying out the 4 Nurturing Peatlands, so that is a lot, but the main reason, again, you have the advantage of paying life is probably a good thing with this deck, right? Because you've got Death Shadow. I'm not sure, like, Grixis doesn't run this, but I guess it's because, they're running 3 colors, so, they're going to have access to a lot more fetches, and they're going to get more value out of those fetches, because they're going to have more shocks that they want to run. But instead of running, like, 6 to 8 shocks or whatever the traditional Grixis runs. This is good because it does give you that, and also it does have that filtering. It allows you to draw a card. So again, especially with a lot of these interactions that we have here, particularly with Augur, drawing a card is very helpful because you know what that next card's going to be, right? So this happened in one of the games I was playing where I just really needed a land with Augur, and I just drew a card, drew the Endurance off the top of my deck or whatever, got a land, could play the land, and then I was able to play some other stuff as well. So I think that Nurturing Peatland is really good when you know what the top of your library is going to be, obviously, because you're going to get that extra little bit of filtering. So, anyways, good card. Obviously, just cycling in general is good, but particularly what's going on, and paying the life, not a big deal, and potentially can be good with Death Shadows. I think that's an innovation. It's pretty strong as well. I do like the Blooming Marshes, just the fast land, being able to play black or green, because, you do have various 1-drops. You can, play Thoughtseize on turn 1, or you could play Nobles or Birds on turn 1. So you kind of want access to both green and black on turn 1, depending on the situation. That's why almost every land gives you green or black, except for Cradle, Urborg, and the basics. I'm not even sure, honestly, if Cradle is worth it. I guess it probably is. You're not paying that much of a cost for it. It can help fix the mana of the enemy team, so it is something worth considering, but I think you probably still want the Urborg and the Yavimaya, you do have some things with double pips, like, Endurance has double pips, Auger has double pips. You don't have any double blacks, but some stuff out of the sideboard, like Necromentia, might have double black, so I guess War Chiefs, if you kick it, has double black. But that's probably where I would go with the mana base. I think 20 is probably all right with eight mana accelerant creatures. You'll probably be on time. There is a chance that you might want to run one or two more lands. If you do that, maybe you could cut one of the Augurs or cut, one of the Confidants or something like that. Like I said, this is a preliminary list, so I just kind of have 4 of kind of everything that's good here. But there might be some more nuance. You could throw in another land or another utility card in there somewhere. The other cards I was thinking about were, if you want to build this, deck, let me know what you think if you try out some of these different versions. Torok Dreadcanter is obviously really good. He's 1 black, 1 colorless. Comes into play. I think he's a 2/1 to start with, and anytime your opponent discards a card, he gets a +1/+1 counter. And if you kick him for an extra 2 black, so I think he ends up costing 3 black and 1 colorless, so pretty heavy on the black. If you kick him, then he comes in as a 4/3, and the enemy has to discard 2 cards at random, and he's protection from white. So, obviously very good against a lot of the control matchups out there, because they're going to be using Prismatic Ending, Solitudes. Teferi's not going to be able to bounce him, although you probably would want him to bounce him, right? If they're, dumb enough to do that. But anyways, he's okay. My main problem is, it's just like, he's basically a turn 4 play. Like, you can play him turn 2, but you don't really want to. And you already have so much card advantage anyways. I just don't think that killing their cards, like, it's obviously good, but I'd rather have something that I could just play, on turn 1, turn 2, something like that, that's going to have a little bit more power. Dauthi Voidwalker. Now, I would consider Dauthi a little bit more. It's anytime anything goes to their graveyard, he's 2 black for a 3/2 with Shadow, which means he can only be blocked by other creatures with Shadow. Then anytime anything goes to a graveyard, it gets exiled with a counter on it, and then you can tap and sacrifice Dauthi and play any card that has a counter on it for free. So, obviously very good against, Tron or other big decks where you're going to be able to find really expensive cards that are high impact. I don't know. He's good. It's totally worth considering putting him in there, but I just don't know what I would cut. Like, he doesn't have a lot of synergy with your deck. You're already going to have the graveyard covered probably with 4 Endurances, and I just think that's a more well-rounded card if you're looking for graveyard hate. But I could definitely see putting in some Dauthis, maybe in place of some Dark Confidants. I don't think it's a big enough threat to replace Shadow. Like, you could just try to go just more utility and just, like, cut the Shadows and just go for Dauthis instead. I mean, maybe that's a way to go. I really like Shadow in this deck because it just adds so much extra value to things like Dark Confidant, like we mentioned before. But if you really, really want to hate on those graveyards, then maybe Dauthi is a good play. So, anyways, he's definitely worth considering. I would consider him over Torok. Scavenging Ooze is another one. Like, you could definitely make room for an Ooze in here. It does give you that life gain just in case you do get a little bit low and they're threatening you with a lightning bolt or something like that. Ooze is nice, although it is kind of a nombo with Endurance, right? If you shuffle all their cards back, that's a problem. You can eat your own creatures with Scavenging Ooze, but then you also have Grist, so you're making your Grist ultimates less effective if you eat your own creatures. So it's just kind of weird because you don't really need to eat the enemy creatures out of the graveyard with the 4 Endurance, and you don't need to eat your own creatures because of the Grist. So it is a little awkward. It's a little awkward. But if you do need the life gain, that is a pretty decent place to go. And, I mean, it's a good 2-drop, just 2 for a 2/2 that can start putting in some work. So you could maybe go 3 Endurance and 1 Ooze if you want to do that kind of split. The Death's Shadow I was not sure about, but I definitely like it. I think it just fits in so well with this deck. Again, because you can go find it so easily with Auger. You're already damaging yourself a ton. It just works really, really well. And then Tarmogoyf, again, usually good. Almost anything that plays green that's like a mid-range deck has historically run Tarmogoyf. Maybe I'm wrong for not playing it, but again, the fact that you're shuffling away their graveyard all the time, people are probably going to be interacting with your graveyard too, a lot of the time. Since, Graveyard Hate is at such a high premium right now. I just don't know. I mean, and you're not running Baubles, you're not running Urzas, like I said before, so I just feel like there's just not quite enough value there. You could try to run Urzas with this deck, if you want to. Since it's only 2 colors, it'd be pretty easy to splash it in there. Maybe that's worth considering. You could run, just a few less of the utility lands. I think it probably hurts the shadow portion a little bit, though, because you're not going to be able to run as many fetches and shocks and things like that. And you do really, really want to be able to play, your Bird or your Thoughtseize or something like that on turn 1 or turn 2. So I'm just not sure if Urza's the place to be. You don't have high impact artifacts to go get. Like, you can go get Shadow Spear, but most of your creatures aren't that big except for Shadow, potentially. So I don't know. I just feel like Urza's, we just don't have any other artifacts. I just feel like this is not really the place for Urza's. So, anyways, Tarmogoyf, probably not that great in this particular deck. Other cards that I thought could be pretty good, also worth considering, Unearth would get a lot of value in this deck. It's definitely worth considering. It's 1 black. Choose any creature card from your graveyard with casting cost 3 or less. Put it directly into play. And you can cycle it for 2. So that is really nice. I mean, all of our cards are 3 casting costs or less. You could go grab Grist with this, because remember, Grist does count as a creature when it's in the graveyard. So that is really nice value. You could grab your Shadows back, your Dark Confidants. You could grab back Endurance. I believe it's a sorcery, so you couldn't do a ton of super tricky stuff with Endurance. So it is nice. It does offer you like a pretty good value proposition. One mana to potentially get back a 3 mana card. You are going to be cycling through a lot of your cards with Grist, so you could, put some good creatures in the graveyard. So that's definitely worth considering. It's just like, what do you cut though? Right? Like that's always the huge question when you're doing deck building, is not just like what's good in the deck, but what do you replace? Right? I think you have to have the interaction package. Right? Like, I feel like you have to have 4 Fatal Push with this, at least, to, deal with monkeys and, Hedron crabs and just all sorts of other early threats to kill their Birds of Paradise or their Ignobles before they ramp into Yawgmoth. Whatever the case is, I feel like you have to have at least 6 pieces of turn 1 remover. The hammer creatures, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, you're going to want 4 Thoughtseizes, just, peanut butter and jelly with your Death Shadow. And then I think 2 more with Inquisition is where you want to be too. So then my question is, where do you go with Unearth? You want a lot of creatures in the deck, right? Because you get a lot of value off the Grist Ultimate with creatures. Auger of Autumn can only cast creature spells, lands and creature spells, not sorceries, not instants, only lands and creatures. So you obviously want a really high density of creatures, because if you run into an instant or a sorcery, well, you can't do anything else for that turn unless you Grist it or shuffle it with a fetch land or Nurturing Peat it. There are ways to work around it, but again, the fewer creatures you run, the less effective Auger of Autumn, Grist, and a lot of these other creatures are going to be. So it is cute, but it is not card advantage. It's 1 for 1. You're just getting a mana advantage a lot of the time. And it's not something you can really play super early game. So I don't know. It is very, very good. It's maybe worth considering, maybe in a sideboarded games or something like that, but I just feel like it's just really hard for me to figure out what to cut with my current deck to put that in there. I mean, maybe you could just trim on all of these, like trim 1 Autumn of Augur, trim a Dark Confidant, trim an Endurance, maybe trim a Kozilek or something like that, and then put Unearths in there. It's totally possible, but I'm having a hard time seeing it right now. There are a lot of 3-drops in this deck. So that's, you've got your Augurs, you've got your Grist, and you've got your Endurances. So it's not like an insane amount, but maybe if you want to trim down on that, just if you think it's going to be hard for you to double spell, might be worth considering. Abrupt Decay, as I mentioned before, is just a really good catch-all. It will kill almost anything. I think it could be good in like sideboarded games maybe, where they're more likely to bring in stuff like Blood Moon or Chalice of the Void, or just other annoying cards that you might have to deal with. So Abrupt is okay. I like Assassin's Trophy in boarded games a lot of times, because that's going to be able to kill it's going to be able to kill your Urzas, your Urza Sagas. It's going to be able to kill your Urza lands. It's going to be able to just deal with anything you want to deal with that comes out. And yes, they do get a land, but you're going to beat them with the value town game. It's fine. They can have an extra land. I think in a lot of matchups, especially post-board, it's not about the land. It's about, do they find their specific card that's going to beat you? Otherwise, you're just going to win a lot of the mid-range matchups, I think. Collected Company is another one that I really, really wanted to put in here just because we have so many good hits. We have 28 creatures, so there's going to be a lot of cards you could hit with that. Nothing is for casting cost, so literally all of your creatures are good. You can get Grist off of Collected Company because it counts as a creature. It's just so many good things that could happen with Coco, and I really, really wanted to put it in here. But again, it's like, what do I cut? Right? I just feel like I can't cut this disruption package. At least not like pre-board. Maybe I could have Coco's in the sideboard or something like that if we're playing against a control deck. Blue-white, or like maybe a combo deck, or just something where Fatal Push is not going to have a lot of value. Then maybe you could bring in Coco for just like more value. But again, we already have so much value. Right? We already have Augers. We have Dark Confidants. We're already going to be getting a lot of value. So I would really, really love to put Coco in there. I don't know what I would cut. It's also 4 mana, which is a lot. We do have Ramp to help us get there. So it's another thing that's just kind of like Unearth. It's a super good card. It's just hard to fit in. I would probably put in Coco before Unearth just because this is card advantage. It's a really, really big card if you manage to stick it. So I don't know. I mean, maybe you could go down to 24 creatures. Again, just trim on all your 3 casting cost stuff. Just take like 1 card off of it. I would not trim Grist, but the other ones, like Auger, again, it doesn't. If you draw multiples of those, it doesn't feel great. You don't get any extra value off of that. Maybe Dark Confidant, maybe 4 is too much. Endurance is an all-star all the time, but maybe you don't need to cast it multiple times per game. So I don't know. Maybe you could trim 1 Auger, 1 Dark Confidant, 1 Endurance, and throw in 3 Cocos and see what you think. But as I've said before with Unearth, I've said it numerous times, when you start taking creatures out of the deck, it's just going to be less effective with Auger, it's going to be less effective with Grist, and it's going to be less effective with Collected Company itself, because you want a really high density of creatures. Because if you only hit 1, that's going to feel bad. So, anyways, awesome card. I'm just not sure where you'd fit it in, unless you just don't care about the interaction. If you're just like, YOLO, whatever, I'm just going to, not run Inquisitions and Blood Chiefs, and I'm just going to stick with 4 Fatal Pushes, 4 Thought Seizes, and just run them over with creatures. Just let them hit me once or twice with Monkey. Who cares? I'm going to go for value. I mean, that's a totally reasonable proposition. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I could try it out. It does push your curve up pretty high, though, if you don't have those 1 mana interactions. But it is really, really good in a lot of grindy matchups, especially because you have so many 3s. Just imagine like sticking a Grist and an Auger or something like that off a Coco at the end of their turn. Like, it's on, right? And then Castle Locthwain, I thought about putting one of those in there. Obviously, it is a little on the slow side. It does come into play tapped most of the time. Costing the health is not as big of a deal because you do have Shadows, so that is good, but I don't know. It is a little on the slow side, and again, like, I don't think you're going to have a hard time getting cards with this deck, like drawing cards. So, I don't know. Maybe one would be worthwhile. It doesn't have a huge opportunity cost, but what is the condition on it again? Let me see. I think it's you have to have a swamp or it enters tapped or something like that. Yeah, so if you have a swamp, it doesn't. So I don't know. Maybe running 1 could be decent. You're not running Urborg makes everything a swamp, which is good. But you are still also running like 4 Nurturing Peatlands and 2 Blooming Marshes, which are not swamps. And I do think I would rather have the 4 Nurturing just because, again, it's such a great value because it's double colored. It deals the damage to you, and you can filter it, so it's really hard to get flooded with that. So you really don't have a lot of swamps in here, right? Like, you're going to go get your Overgrown Tomb like every time, anytime you hit a fetch land. So you've got that going for you, but I don't know. That's definitely on the fence. I could definitely see a world where that could be a good call in this deck, but I'm just not entirely sure. Maybe you could cut a Blooming Marsh for it, potentially. It's just, again, if you start off with Lochthwain and Swamp in your opening hand, it's going to feel really bad when you're staring down a bunch of Birds of Paradises and Ignoble Hierarch. So it feels really bad to have either a black only or a green only land in your hand when you need both, especially when you need the greens, because you do have a lot of double pip greens with the Endurances and the Augers. So anyways, another couple of cards to think about. I mean, Bitter Blossom would fit in pretty well. It is a 2-drop. It's not a creature, which, does feel kind of bad. It does start to generate some value for you. I was thinking about that beforehand when I was thinking about like Collected Company or Court of Calling or whatever with that deck. It does work, well with stuff like Grist, but I think probably not. It's just still a little too slow. Losing the Life is a decent little combo with Death Shadow, and then Fiend Artisan is something that I've talked about quite a bit that can be pretty good. I'll just look him up here, but I just don't think he fits. Like, it's good to sacrifice Grist tokens for it, and you can sacrifice things like birds, but it obviously works a lot better with Undying creatures. This is just a thing where it just seems like a good card where it's hard to find a home for it. I guess +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, so that's good. You got 28 creatures in your deck. 2 mana. And then you pay a green or a black, and then X, sacrifice a creature, search your library for any creature with converted mana cost X or less, and put it on the battlefield. So you could, sacrifice a Grist token, pay 4 and go get an Endurance, or go get an Auger, or, whatever sideboard creature you might want to run. So anyways, I think that it could be a pretty decent choice. You could also run a Magus of the Moon in the sideboard if you want. So I didn't have the land base. I don't have that currently. But you could put in, one more Pain land. Maybe you could take off one of those Blooming Marshes and put in a Stomping Ground, and then your birds and your Ignoble Hierarchs can also cast it. But Magus of the Moon does just completely wreck a lot of decks that are not expecting it or ready for it. Obviously, like your Tron decks, your Titan decks are going to have a really hard time with that. But, that is something that is becoming increasingly popular with Yawgmoth decks, is to just run that one Magus of the Moon and one Stomping Ground. And I think that's something that could work here. Although it does work better in that type of deck where you do have Court of Calling, where you do have Eldritch Evolution. So maybe it's not worth it with this style of deck. You don't really need to do that to get cute. You can probably win a lot of those matchups anyways. But anyways, Fiend Artisan, worth considering. Probably not, but it's a cool card that maybe could find a home somewhere. Obviously going to be better when you have Undying creatures. And then you could run Court of Calling. You could run Finale of Devastation. Probably not Finale as much. It does cost less than Cord. It's 1 less, which could be relevant, although Cord, obviously, you can tap creatures for it. So, Cord is good, but you're not playing Wall of Roots here. You don't really have a lot of silver bullet creatures. Like, you're not trying to assemble a combo like you do with Yawgmoth. It's fine if you just draw, any combination. A lot of times of these creatures, you don't need a specific one. You're not running silver bullets, so it's probably not worth it. And again, you'd have to cut something, as I've said a billion times, and it's like, what do you cut? I'd rather just have the disruption most of the time. Just rip their hand apart, just take out the board, and then just run them over with your card advantage. Just play the 1-for-1 game until you stick an Augur or a Dark Confidant, and they just don't have an answer for it. And you'll eventually probably just win the game. So, not necessarily the type of deck for that. Even though I really, really love like the search kind of cards and the silver bullets and things like that, I'm just not sure that it works here. And honestly, even in the Yawgmoth decks, I end up siding out Cord, 1 or 2 in a lot of matchups just because it's so hard to like stick a board because everybody's just killing everything. The meta is just so interactive right now, which is good and healthy, but it just really lowers the value on things like Court of Calling and Eldritch Evolution when you're 2-for-1ing yourself in a lot of situations if they end up interacting. But anyways, that's going to be it. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about this deck? I think that it's pretty cool. I'll have to test it out some more. Just green-black mid-range. A lot of people are not running Shadow, but I think that Shadow fits in perfectly, as I said before, just to give you that over-the-top threat to go with all of your card advantage. And you just, with this deck, like I said, you're just really abusing just this super card engine of Augur, Grist, Dark Confidant, Endurance, like all of these just give you massive blowouts in a lot of matchups if they go unchecked. So I'm really digging the deck. So let me know what you think. Give it a try. I'll probably be, if it works out well in testing, I'll be streaming it pretty soon. And that's going to be it. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.